My husband called me from his office on a Tuesday afternoon, and the first thing he said wasn't hello. It wasn't, how are you? Or I'll be late for dinner. It was, Patricia, I need you to sign some papers. The business is sold. You'll get a fair amount. But I need you out of the house by the end of the month. I was standing in our kitchen, the same kitchen where I had made his coffee every morning for 31 years. The same kitchen where I had helped our daughter with her homework at the counter, where I had cooked Thanksgiving dinner 11 times running because my mother-in-law always said I made the better gravy. I was holding a dish towel, and I remember thinking how strange it was that my hands kept drying a plate that was already dry. I'm sorry, I said. Say that again. He said it again. Same words, slightly faster, like reading from a script he had rehearsed. The business. Our business. The flooring company my husband and I had started together in 1997, out of a rented storage unit with $12,000 we had saved, mostly from my salary as a school administrator. The company that had his name on the sign, but my fingerprints on everything else. The bookkeeping in the early years, the supplier calls I made from our dining room table, the payroll I ran by hand before we could afford software. The company that had grown into something real. Something with 43 employees and contracts across 4 counties. Sold. And I was supposed to be out of the house by the end of the month. I was 62 years old. I had been married to this man since I was 31. I had a pension from the school district that paid less than most people's car payments, a savings account I hadn't looked at in a while, and apparently no home, no share of anything, and a husband who had turned into someone I did not recognize. I said, "Where is this coming from?" He said, "I've been thinking about this for a long time." I said, "Who is she?" There was a pause, a very specific kind of pause that tells you everything without telling you anything. Then he said the name didn't matter, and that wasn't the point, and that we had grown apart, and that he deserved to be happy. He was 64 years old and he deserved to be happy. I thought about the $12,000. I thought about the storage unit. I thought about the morning I drove him to the emergency room with a kidney stone while I was 7 months pregnant with our daughter. I thought about happiness and what it meant to someone who had been happy. Or at least I thought I had been, and now was standing in her kitchen, drying a plate that didn't need drying. I didn't cry. I'm not sure why. I think I was too far past the part of myself that cries, and had gone somewhere quieter and colder, somewhere that just watches and calculates. I said, "I'll call you back." And I hung up. I sat down at the kitchen table, and I did something I should have done years ago. I started writing down everything I knew about our finances. What I knew, what I didn't know, what I thought I knew but had never actually verified. My husband had handled most of the business finances. I had stepped back from the day-to-day operations about 8 years earlier when my mother got sick and needed me more. But I remembered enough. I remembered the original investment. I remembered putting my name on the LLC documents when we first incorporated. I remembered things, small things, that I had never thought to think about because I had trusted him. And trust, I was learning, is a terrible filing system. I wrote for 2 hours. Then I called my daughter. Her name is Jenna, and she lives 40 minutes away with her husband and my 2 grandchildren. She is 30 years old and calm in emergencies, in a way that makes me think she got that from me, though I wasn't feeling particularly calm that night. She listened to everything I told her without interrupting, which is a skill she definitely did not get from her father. When I finished, she said, "Mom, you need a lawyer. Tomorrow morning." I said I didn't know any lawyers. She said she'd find one. By the next afternoon, I was sitting across a desk from a woman named Carol Whitfield. Carol was 50-something, small, with reading glasses pushed up into her hair and the kind of unhurried confidence that tells you she has seen exactly this situation before and is not frightened by it. She had a yellow legal pad and a pen, and she asked me to start from the beginning. And so I did. I told her about the storage unit. I told her about the $12,000 and where it came from. I told her I had been on the original LLC filing. I told her I had worked without pay in the early years, doing bookkeeping and vendor calls and administrative work, because we couldn't afford to hire anyone, and I believed in what we were building. I told her the house was purchased in both our names in 2003. I told her I had worked as a school administrator for 22 years and had contributed to our joint accounts throughout the marriage. Carol wrote things down. Occasionally, she asked a question. She didn't react much, just nodded and kept writing. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me over her glasses. "Your husband made a significant error," she said. I asked her what kind. She said, "The kind that happens when someone gets excited about money and forgets that the law is not optional." She explained it to me the way you explain something to someone who is still in shock, which I was, though I was managing not to show it. "Ohio is an equitable distribution state," she said, "which means marital assets are divided fairly in a divorce, and courts look at contributions from both spouses." She said my early financial contribution to the business, documented or provable. She said my years of unpaid labor mattered. She said the fact that my name had been on the original LLC filing mattered quite a lot. She said the house, in both our names, was not going anywhere without my consent. "He told me I needed to be out by the end of the month," I said. Carol looked at me. "He cannot remove you from a home that is legally, equally yours. If he tries to force you out, that is a matter for the police." I had not cried yet. I came close then, not from sadness, but from something else, from the particular feeling of a floor appearing under your feet when you didn't know you were falling. I said, "He said the business is already sold," she said. "Then we need to find out exactly what was sold, for how much, and when those sale proceeds landed. Because if this was done without your knowledge during the marriage, that changes things considerably." She picked up her pen again. "Do you have access to any business records?" I thought about it. I thought about the filing cabinet in our home office that I had always been allowed to look in, but had rarely bothered to. I thought about the early tax returns I had signed. I thought about the email account we had shared in the first years before everything migrated to systems I wasn't part of. "Maybe," I said. Carol said, "Go home, look carefully. Don't move anything, don't take anything. Just look and photograph what you find. And Patricia, do not sign anything he sends you. Not one word." I went home. My husband wasn't there. He had been staying somewhere else, which meant I had the house and the filing cabinet and several hours of quiet in which to understand what had happened to my life. The filing cabinet was unlocked. Inside were business tax returns, going back to 2009, when my husband had started using an accountant I had never met. I photographed them all with my phone. I found a folder labeled with the name of a company I didn't recognize, a private equity firm, as it turned out, based in Columbus. There were preliminary letters of intent dated 14 months earlier. There were signed documents dated 6 weeks ago. The final sale price was $4.2 million. I sat on the floor of our home office with my phone in my hands and looked at that number for a long time. $4.2 million for a company that started with $12,000. For a company whose early success had been, in no small part, because I had done work no one ever put a salary figure to, because I was a wife, and that's what wives did. I texted Carol. She texted back, "Perfect. This is exactly what we need." I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in our bed and I thought about 31 years and what you can know and not know about a person at the same time. I thought about the way my husband had handed me a plate of eggs just last Sunday and asked if I wanted more coffee, and I had said yes, thank you. And he had poured it, and somewhere behind that ordinary Sunday morning was 14 months of secret negotiations and a decision to sell everything we built and leave me with nothing. I thought about how a person stands in their own kitchen and pours coffee and feels nothing about that. I didn't know what I felt. I knew what I intended to do. The next weeks were not pleasant. My husband hired a lawyer of his own, a younger man named Garrett, who sent long emails full of language designed to sound like generosity while offering as little as possible. The offer was a lump sum, slightly less than a quarter of the sale proceeds, in exchange for my signature on a full settlement and release of claims. The email used the phrase fair and reasonable 4 times. Carol read it, then called me. She said, "This is not fair and it is not reasonable." She said that based on my documented contributions, the original investment, the unpaid labor in the early years, my status as an original LLC member, I had a legitimate claim to a substantially larger portion of the sale proceeds. She said that in Ohio, when a business is built and grown during a marriage with contributions from both spouses, the court does not simply look at whose name was on the door. She said Garrett knew this. She said the offer was what lawyers send when they hope the other side is frightened and doesn't know any better. She sent a counter. Garrett's client, my husband, rejected it. Carol said, "That's fine. We'll let a judge do the math. I will not pretend that wasn't frightening." I had never been in a courtroom. I had spent my entire adult life believing that legal things happen to other people, to people whose lives had gone wrong in obvious ways, not to 62-year-old women who had done everything right and still ended up here. But Carol was steady, and I had learned by then to follow steady people. So I followed. While we waited, I did practical things. I changed my direct deposit from our joint account to an account in my name only. I called my retirement plan administrator and updated my beneficiaries. I made a list of every joint account, every shared subscription, every financial thing that existed in both our names. I treated it like a project because that was the only way I knew to get through it. Make it a thing to be managed, not a wound to be suffered. My daughter called every other day. My granddaughter, who is 7 and does not know what is happening, told me over the phone that her hamster had learned to climb things, and I laughed at that for real. A real laugh, the kind that surprised me. My husband called once during that period. He said Carol was being unreasonable, and that I was making things difficult, and that he had expected better from me. I thought about everything I had expected from him and said nothing for a moment. Then I said, "I put $12,000 into that company. I worked for you for free for 6 years. My name was on the founding documents. I am entitled to what the law says I'm entitled to, and that is what Carol is asking for." He said, "I built that company." I said, "You built it with my money and my work, and 31 years of me holding everything else together so you could focus on building it." He didn't say anything after that. I said, "I'll see you in court," which I had never said to anyone in my life and which felt, I will admit, like something. The settlement came before we actually went to trial. "This often happens," Carol told me. "When the numbers are clear and the other side's attorney is honest with his client, things resolve." Garrett was, it turned out, honest with his client. The final settlement gave me 48% of the net sale proceeds after taxes and fees. It gave me the house outright. My husband signed his interest over to me as part of the agreement. It gave me a cash payment to account for the unpaid contribution years that had been documented through our early tax records, and the testimony of 2 former employees who remembered quite clearly the owner's wife who answered phones and reconciled the books and drove supply runs when the delivery driver called in sick. My husband got to keep his new life, whatever that looked like. I got to keep mine. The number on the check, the real number, the final one that clicked, more than I had believed was possible for someone like me, a retired school administrator who had driven a 12-year-old Subaru for 6 years because it seemed wasteful to replace something that still worked. I sat with that for a while. I didn't go anywhere or buy anything. I just sat with it. Here is what I know now that I did not know a year ago. I know that love is not a legal document, but that legal documents matter. I had moved through 31 years of marriage, trusting that our partnership meant something. And it did mean something, but meaning something and being protected are not the same thing. And I had confused them. I know that my daughter was right to tell me to see a lawyer the next morning. I know that the hours I spent in that home office photographing tax returns were some of the most important hours of my life, even though I was sitting on a floor and crying a little by the end, which I was, though I hadn't mentioned that before. I know that the women who came before me, who signed things they didn't read, who left homes they were entitled to, who accepted the first number because they were afraid and alone and didn't know they could refuse. I understand them now in a way I couldn't before. There is a particular kind of fear that comes from not knowing what you have the right to ask for. I had that fear, and I walked through it, mostly because Carol was in front of me holding a light, and because my daughter kept calling, and because at 62 years old, I had the extraordinary gift of enough stubbornness to stay. I still live in this house. The house that is mine now, fully, with a deed that says so. I repainted the living room in November, a warm cream color my husband had always vetoed in favor of beige. I bought a new kitchen table because I didn't want the old one anymore. I have learned, slowly, that the things that reminded me of before are not the things worth keeping. My granddaughter came to stay for a week in December. She brought the hamster. It did, in fact, climb things. I am 63 now. I wake up every morning in my own house, with my own money, with my own name on everything it should be on. And I think about the woman who stood in this kitchen holding a dish towel, drying a plate that didn't need drying, trying to understand what had just happened to her life. I want to tell her, you will be all right. Not because everything is fair, it isn't. And not because the people who should protect you always will, they don't, but because you know more than you think you know, and you are stronger than you have ever been asked to be. And sometimes the end of one thing is simply the beginning of a life that was always yours. Waiting. You just have to be willing to ask what you're owed, and then refuse to take less.